Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn the Gemara Masechta Shabbos on Daf Tesamid Beis. Let's begin. So in this class, we will begin a new Mishnah, as well as learn the first piece of Gemara on the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says, Lo yeshiv adam l'fnei asaper, a person may not sit in front of the barber, samach lemincha ache yispalo, close to the time of mincha until he davens. A half an hour before mincha, a person is not allowed to sit in the front of the barber, because we're concerned that if he does, he may come to miss tfilas mincha. And the Mishnah now will mention another 4 activities that a person is not allowed to begin a half an hour before the time of mincha. Lo yikanis adam lemerchatz, a person may not enter the bathhouse. V'lo lebursaki, and not the tannery. V'lo lechal, and not to eat. V'lo ledin, and not to a din Torah. A person is not allowed to begin any of these 5 activities a half an hour before the time of mincha, because we're concerned that if he does, he may come to miss tfilas mincha. The Mishnah continues and says, V'im hischilu ein mafsikin, and if one started, one doesn't have to stop. So although lichatchila, originally a person is not permitted to begin any of these 5 activities, nevertheless, b'di evid, if a person did begin one of these 5 activities, we will not obligate him to stop. Rather, we'll say we rely that he'll remember to daven mincha and he'll daven afterwards. And the Mishnah concludes and says, Mafsikin likris krishma ve'ein mafsikin l'tfila. One has to stop to say shema, and one does not have to stop for tefillah. So for Shema, if a person began an activity which he's not permitted to begin, we will obligate him to stop. However, for Tefillah, like we said earlier, if a person began an activity which he's not permitted to begin, we will not obligate him to stop. And with that, we learned the Mishnah, and now we can move on to the Gemara, which the Gemara basically consists of a question and an answer. There will be lead-up and supporting points, but the Gemara itself consists basically of a question and an answer. The Gemara begins, and it's in a purple arrow pointing downwards, because the Gemara is going to begin by presenting information that will lead into a question. So says the Gemara, Hi samach lemincha, which close to mincha is this? When it says a person can't begin these 5 activities a half an hour before mincha, which mincha is it referring to? There's mincha g'dayla, which is much earlier in the day, and there's mincha ktana, which is much later in the day. The Gemara says, Ilema lemincha g'dayla, if you'll say it's to mincha g'dayla, amaylay, why not? Why can't a person begin these 5 activities? Ha'ika shows by yom tuva, but there's much time left in the day. We shouldn't be concerned that he'll come to miss mincha. This is a very early time in the day. There's still much time left for davening mincha. Rather, it's close to mincha ktana. Then it would make sense that we prohibit it, because since it's later in the day and there's less time left to daven tefillas mincha, we're concerned that a person may come to miss the tefillah. Now this leads into a question, and that is, if one began, he doesn't have to stop. If a person began an activity a half an hour before mincha ktana, we will not obligate him to stop. So nema tehevet tiyufta de Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Let us say this is a question on Rabbi Shua ben Levi. If our Mishnah holds that if a person began an activity close to the time of mincha ktana, we will not obligate him to stop, it'll be a question on Rabbi Shua ben Levi, like we'll bring down in a moment, who holds that we will obligate the person to stop. And we'll bring down the opinion of Rabbi Shua ben Levi in a purple arrow pointing upwards, because it's the support why it's a question on Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. The Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, for Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, Kevin shehigia zman tfilas hamincha, since the time of mincha arrived, asr lo adam sheyitim klum. It's asr for a person to taste anything, kaidim sheyispalol tfilas hamincha, before he davens tfilas hamincha. So from the fact that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said a person is not permitted to taste anything, it indicates that even if the person began eating, that we will stop him from continuing to eat. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is referring to the time of tfilas mincha by mincha ktana. So it comes out that our Mishnah is a contradiction to the teaching and the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. And the Gemara answers, Lo no, lo elam, in truth, samach lemincha g'dayla. It's close to mincha g'dayla. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is referring to mincha ktana. And then, since it's much later in the day, if the person began eating, we will obligate him to stop. However, our Mishnah is referring to mincha g'dayla, which is much earlier in the day. And therefore, if a person began eating or any of the other 4 activities, since there's still much time left in the day, we will not obligate him to stop. So that's the answer why it's not a question, and it's not a contradiction between the opinion in our Mishnah and the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. However, we need to support this answer, because the Gemara originally said that it doesn't seem that it would make sense that our Mishnah is referring to mincha g'dayla, because since there's so much time left in the day, we should never have made it prohibited, we should never have made it usher to begin these 5 activities. So that the Gemara will explain in 2 possible ways, and they're both in purple arrows pointing upwards, because they're supporting the question, they're addressing a problem on the question, they're upholding it by saying we could explain why these 5 activities would be prohibited, although it's so early in the day. And the Gemara begins and says, and we're going to go through each item in the Mishnah explaining why it would be prohibited. So we're going to begin with the haircut. Uvitispirus ben Alasha, and it's by the haircut of Ben Alasha. Ben Alasha was a son-in-law of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who he did the haircut like they did in the Beis Mikdash for the Kohen Gadol, which was a very lengthy process. And therefore, although it's so early in the day, since this is such a lengthy haircut, it could lead that a person will miss Tfilas Mincha. We're going to go on to show that all of the things in the Mishnah are referring to when they could be very long, and it could lead that a person will miss Tfilas Mincha, although he's starting them very early in the day, a half an hour before Mincha Gdela. V'loy lemerchatz, and not to the bathhouse. Lekula milsa the merchatz. It's for the whole process of bathing. And like Rashi explains, this includes washing one's head, washing one's body with cold water and then hot water, and then also going to sweat. V'loy lebursiki, and not to a tannery. Lebursiki Gdela, it's a large tannery. And like Rashi explains, it means that the person has many hides, and it's the beginning of the process of tanning. V'loy lechel, and not to eat besuda Gdela, it's by a large meal. Like, for example, the meal of a wedding, which could extend very long. V'loy din, and not to a din teira. Betchilas din, it's the start of the din teira, where then a person can't know how long the din teira will extend. So that's the first way of explaining why these 5 activities will be usher so early in the day. It's referring to these activities when they could take a very long time. So, for example, we said the haircut is talking about a long haircut. When we said the tanning, it's talking about the long tanning, and so on and so forth. Now the Gemara is going to present another answer, which is going to explain that even when these activities are in a shorter version, it will still make sense why we made them prohibited so early in the day. And this is an explanation given by Rav Acher bar Yaakov. So the Gemara says, Rav Acher bar Yaakov Amar, Rav Acher bar Yaakov said, Lo elam in truth, but dispersed the done it's by a haircut of hours. And all of this is going to be in a purple arrow pointing upwards, because it's also pointing and explaining how it could be my mincha gdela, and still in all, we would prohibit these activities so early in the day. And although we'll see that the Gemara is going to present much of it in a question and answer form, it's all said in the context of supporting what we said, and therefore it's all in one purple arrow. So he says, really in truth, it's talking about a regular haircut, a haircut of hours, not of ben alosha. Lechatchila amayla yeshev. Why originally may one not sit? It's because gzeira shema yishavar azug. It's a decree because maybe the scissors will break, and if the scissor breaks, then it needs to be replaced, it needs to be fixed. It could end up taking a very long time. So this answer is explaining that even when they're short, there's still a concern they could end up becoming very long. V'loy lemerchatz, and not to the bathhouse. Lohazia ba'ametz, to only sweat. Lechatchila ma'alei. Why originally may he not, if it's such a short thing? Because gzeira shema yisalfa. It's a decree because maybe he will faint. V'loy lebursiki, and not to a tannery. Liyuna ba'ametz, only to inspect. Lechatchila ma'alei. Why originally may he not, if he's only going to inspect? Dilma chazib seida bezvine umatrid. Maybe he will see a loss in his merchandise and become occupied. And like Rashi says, because of the distress and the pain and the worry that he has about his stuff, he'll come to miss tfilas mincha. V'loy lechol, and not to eat. B'sudak tana, it's by a small meal. Lechatchila ma'alei. Why originally may he not? Because dilma osi l'mshuchim. Maybe he'll come to extend it. The person might decide to eat a long meal. V'loy ledin, and not to a din teira, big mardin. It's by the end of the din teira. Lechatchila ma'alei. Why originally may he not? If it's already the end of the din teira, because dilma chazi taima v'sasur dina. Maybe they will see a reason and overturn the ruling. Although they're ready to make a ruling, maybe new information will come up, and then they need to undo their intended ruling and start over again, considering the new information. So to summarize the Gemara, we began with the Mishnah that basically said that there are 5 activities a person is not permitted to do a half an hour before the time of Mincha. The Mishnah continued and said, however, if a person began any of these 5 activities, he will not have to stop. The Gemara presented a question, which is that it seems that our Mishnah is referring to the time of Mincha Ktana, because by Mincha Gdela it's so early in the day, we wouldn't prohibit these activities. And if that's the case, it creates a question and a contradiction between the opinion in our Mishnah and that of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Because our Mishnah says that although it's prohibited to start these activities, if a person did stop, we do not obligate him to. If a person did start, we do not obligate him to stop. However, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says that if a person did begin eating by the time of Mincha Ktana, we will obligate him to stop. And the Gemara answered that our Mishnah is actually referring to Mincha Gdela, which is earlier in the day. And therefore, if the person started, we don't obligate him to stop because it's so much earlier in the day. And then we gave 2 explanations for why we would prohibit these activities in the first place if it's so early in the day. And one of the answers was that we explained how each of these activities could actually be talking about activities that take a very long time. And those are the activities that are prohibited so early in the day. And the second answer is we're even talking about when these activities take their regular time or a short amount of time. And the reason they're prohibited so early in the day is because we explained how each one of these activities, something could come up which would cause that they to extend much longer, and then we're concerned that a person might come to miss tfilas mincha.